some sizes. This is one that grows here. This is one you're going to find in your yard. Polytrichum. This one is not growing here, not out in the ground. You may find it growing in more wooded areas or forested areas. There are tons of different types of moss. We're going to talk about this in class. This is a brick of peat moss. Peat moss, this is actually compressed fossilized moss. And this peat moss is actually burned as fuel. And so mosses have been around for a very long period of time. This is basically nothing but carbon is what this is. This is dead moss plants that are compressed into these bricks, and you have these areas that are called peat bogs where you go in and you harvest these bricks. In some places in Europe, this is the sole source of heating fuel for their homes and their fires. Okay? I have a student that apparently barbecues with this. I had no idea you could use this to barbecue with. So he uses it to barbecue. He says it's really good. I've never heard of it. But this is peat moss. It's hard. Okay? Fairly hard, compressed, compacted carbon. Okay? All right, so let's talk about the life cycle. All right, we're going to pretend I have two little plants that are here. I'm going to erase this little part right here. We'll talk about that later. I'll re-add that. And so let's say that we've got two little plants here. All right, obviously we've got this thing that I told you that's growing out of this plant. So that makes this a what plant?
A female.
It's a female. We're going to call this guy over here who doesn't have one of those things growing out of the male. Okay? He's the male plant. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at each one of them, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the reproduction of this guy, okay? Because it is a little bit weird. Okay? So the first one I want you to look at is the one that says Moss Antheridia. Moss Antheridia is the male. Okay? And it looks like this. Alright, and I want you to notice that I've kind of labeled this guy over here the gametophyte. We'll talk more about what this means when we get into the reproductive life cycle next time. This is the gametophyte as well, even though it doesn't have this. It's the male gametophyte. So I may ask you what generation this is. If I show you this slide under the microscope. This is the gametophyte. There's two. You're either the gametophyte generation or you're the sporophyte. So if I say what generation and what sex is this, your answer would be male gametophyte. Because look, plants are going to have two generations. I told you plant reproduction is weird. Kind of delved into this a little bit with the fungi. I lost everybody. So we're going to bring it back and talk about the plants. That's where it's going to fit. Plants have two generations. They have the gametophyte and they have the sporophyte. The little green plant that I'm passing around, the little dish, gametophyte. It's the part of the moss plant that you can see that's green. Okay? And it's male. How do you know it's male? Well, you're going to look for something in particular. You're going to look for these long tubular structures. These long tubular structures are called the antheridium. Okay? Inside the antheridium is going to be a reproductive cell. If it's male, what do you think we're going to call that reproductive cell? It's sperm. So antheridium is filled with sperm. All right. I don't know if this is going to help you remember or not. Flowers. Female part of the flower is called the pistil, right? Maybe you remember that? If y'all learned that in plants somewhere. Male, we call it the stamen. The end of the stamen, the part that has the pollen on it, is called the anther. Okay? Pollen is basically plant sperm. So, anther, you might want to think anther refers to the male reproductive part. And that's sperm. Don't know if that's going to help or not, but we're going to see anther come back a lot. Alright? So on the test I can ask you, what sex and what generation is this? Male gametophyte, because you are going to look for the antheridium, and it is going to be that long tubular structure, and you can see several of them there, and they're filled with sperm. The sperm are flagellated. Alright? So here's the life cycle as we're going along over here. So here's, in this gametophyte, I've got these little antheridium in this one, if that's the male, right? He's going to make sperm. The sperm are flagellated. The sperm have flagella on them. What do you think they're going to do? They're going to swim. So in that little dish there I just passed around, there could be some male gametophytes producing some sperm. And the sperm have to swim, and they have to swim. It has to be wet, correct? So that's why these guys have to stay moist. These guys cannot be dry, because their flagellated sperm has got to have something it can move its flagella through, right? Doesn't move its flagella through the air, moves its flagella through the water. Okay? So, any questions on this one? Before we move on.
Do we call it male gametophyte?
It is. If I ask you generation, male gametophyte.
And for the name is moss and therapy.
Okay. The name is okay, so I could ask you a couple of things. This is the male gametophyte. This is a moss plant.
Yeah.
If I put the pointer on this structure and ask you antheridium, if I ask you what's inside, sperm. Got it?
Yeah.
And we would need to know the phylum or anything for this.
You do need to know at least phylum Bryophyta.
Okay.
That's it. I am not going to have you know the specific name of the different species of mosses, no. But you should know that you're looking at what's called a bryophyte. All right, so there's our sperm, okay? He's being released. Where do you think it's going to go?
Through the egg.
Okay, it's going to go, I'm going to erase this here. Part here. Okay. So it's going to swim to where? This one's the female gametophyte. And that's the next slide, which is called the moss archegonial head. So there. So if I ask you on the test what generation this is, we are now looking at the female. What generation? Female what? Gametophyte. Female gametophyte. How do we know it's the female gametophyte? We're going to look for this structure here. Kind of like a vase-like structure, maybe. This is called the archegonia. Okay? I want you to notice there's a cell sitting in there. What do you think that cell is if it's female? It's an egg. It's an egg. Archegonia would be like the ovary, and it produces the egg. Okay? Egg. Just like in female humans, the egg doesn't go anywhere. It's simply released, and it waits for the sperm to arrive. Okay? So, somewhere down here in the female archegonia is a little egg. Sperm is going to swim to the egg. Fertilization is going to occur, correct? Right?
Yes.
We're going to get a zygote. Okay. That's pretty much what happens. All right? Now, I want to tell you those little moss that you see in that little dish back there, and these little guys here, and the ones I've drawn up here, That gametophyte generation is what we call a free living generation. He's the one that can live on his own. That little green plant can photosynthesize, it can produce its eggs or sperm, it can do everything that a grown-up plant can do. Okay? And so fertilization takes place. When fertilization takes place, from that zygote is going to emerge the next generation. So this is where it gets weird. Plants have two generations. They have the gametophyte and the sporophyte generation, okay? So, from this zygote, we're going to emerge this little sporophyte generation. Okay? We call this sporophyte. Because it's produced using two cells, what's its number of chromosomes? Is it going to be haploid or diploid? Diploid. Sporophyte's a 2N generation. And down here you can see that I already wrote that the gametophyte is the N generation haploid. Because what does the gametophyte generation produce? Gametes. And gametes are haploid. They're sexual, but they're haploid. They have only one set of genetic information, right? So look, plants do weird things. Plants alternate between these two generations. Okay? We alternate between plants, between that haploid gametophyte generation that produces our haploid gametes, and the sporophyte, which is a diploid zygote, right? You could kind of liken it to us, maybe. You know, kind of like to think about how it relates to us. We don't really call it a generation in us, okay? But you could think of your reproductive organs as being the gametophyte, right? It's going to produce haploid gametes. And then the rest of you would be the sporophyte generation, right? Because you're the diploid organism, right? Except for those gametes that you're producing, ovaries making eggs, sperm making, testes making sperm, right? Kind of. Okay. Maybe that helps. Because plants do things a little bit different. So, now we're going to produce this diploid sporophyte. And you know that you're looking at a female plant if you see that sporophyte generation coming out of it. If it doesn't have it, what sex is it? It's male. Alright, this whole life cycle is in Lab 25 on seedless plants on page 358, accompanied by the pictures of what we just looked at on page 359 and 360. Alright, so let's look at the sporophyte generation now. So here we go. The sporophyte generation looks like this. Alright, so what I'm looking at is this little thing I have on the end right here. We call this the capsule. This is the moss capsule. And that's what I'm looking at, except I flipped it up, okay, the way the slide is going, okay? So if I ask you what generation this is now called the sporophyte generation. And there's the top, the cap, and then here's the body of that capsule. Now I want you to look at what's inside this capsule. Alright, so this whole thing, this whole big thing that you're looking at, this is a moss capsule. Got it? Well, what do you think the sporophyte generation produces? Spores. Okay? So all of the little tiny dots that you see in here are spores. And the spores are haploid. Okay? So, let's just look at them. Okay? So if we move it to get it to point to a spore. There we go, spores. All these little tiny little circular structures you see there are spores. Alright? What happens is the capsule kind of dries out a little bit, and basically the top pops open. So here are all the little spores inside. The little cap pops open, and these little tiny spores fall to the ground. And they germinate. What do you think they're going to germinate into? A new gametophyte. Okay?
And would they start out all as males until they grow?
Nope.
Okay.
Each spore is going to produce either
Male.
a male or a female.
It's just, if it's a female, it'll grow the whole thing.
If it's a female, it'll produce the archegonia, and then it will grow that sporophyte.
Okay.
And bear the
And if
sporophyte.
it's male, it'll just
It'll just be the little green plant.
Okay.
All right? So look. Any questions?
So we just need to know spores.
So it just grows?
What grows?
The spores, like.
That spore?
Yeah.
That spore drops to the ground, and it's going to grow.
So it doesn't need a mate?
Nope. It doesn't. That's not the part that's going to be sexual. These are asexual haploid spores. When these two little plants grow from those little spores, then they make sexual cells, sperm and egg. And then my sperm swims to my egg, fertilizes, we get the sporophyte generation. The spores fall to the ground, they make more male and female plants that produce the sperm and egg that unite to make the sporophyte, and so on and so on. Okay? Plants do it weird.
On the transcript, do you have a slide that looks like this, or would it be?
Are you going to zoom in?
Oh, no, I just wanted to show you what each of the individual spores look like. I'm going to, you may not have a clue what this is. So what I'm going to do is I will do it on this magnification here.
And you just
So
gotta
that you
know-
can see, the lowest magnification so you can get a better perspective of what you're looking at.
And then you just need to know what spores.
The spores are the things inside. The little dots. New gametophytes. Alright, so what do those new gametophytes look like? That's the last slide. When those little spores hit the ground, they germinate into these little guys. Alright? And these little guys are new gametophytes.
These almost look like spooky.
Well, they do, but that's not going to be on the test. 'Cause we've been there, done that.
Yeah, I'm
Do not write spicules on the test. They are gone.
Some part looks like spooky.
So, what you see here are just lots and lots of new baby gametophytes. That's all you see. There's just a bunch of them. They're overlapped with each other. They're kind of crossing over, kind of crossing themselves over each other. I mean, it's just a brand new little moss baby plant is really what it is. So if I pick this little guy right here, okay, just pick one of them. That is a moss protonema. Basically what that means is it's a brand new baby gametophyte. So it's this little spore, and when he lands, he will grow into that thing called a moss protonema, which becomes a full-grown gametophyte. Got it?
So when we look at this, we just need to know it's
Moss protonema. That's it. Okay? Any questions? No questions? That's it for today.